Hello, everyone, and welcome to WordPlay 2021. I'm Rokashi, WordPlay's director, and we at Handai Society are so excited to be able to bring back this event for another year of narrative goodness. This year, the theme was comedy, so the Handai Society team had a blast playing a lot of the different submissions that came in this year. Be sure to support the creators, follow them, and let them know what you think. So, without further ado, now it's time for Wordplay 2021. Sit back, relax, and have fun.
Hi, I'm Len Predko. I'm the Executive Director of Handai Society, and I just want to say thank you so much for joining us for Wordplay 2021. We're super excited to show you all of these games and talks, and I want to say a really big thank you to both Ontario Creates and Clever Endeavor for helping support Wordplay. Have a good time. We'll see you at the end.
I feel like we've been in the uh-oh phase.
Yeah, what is more uh-oh?
Oh my god.
Overcome the complication to completely succeed.
That's like a fairly good ending, I think. Yeah, that's like a.
Live on, long face. Live on.
The curse was real all along.
manager. Oh frick, Karen took the kids again. Deal with it, she.
Here, this cat is clearly cute.
The defense has no objections to this claim. It is a very cute cat.
Sustained. The cat is totes adorbs. What does that have to do with the matter at hand?
Hello everyone and welcome
Benefits as took the kids again. Deal with it, she.
Here, this cat is clearly cute.
The defense has no objections to this claim. It is a very cute cat.
Sustained. The cat is totes adorbs. What does that have to do with the matter at hand?
What would a real lawyer say in this situation?
It is not a scam. I gave him a tattoo, just like he asked me to.
Exactly. It would be a scam if she took his money and ran, but instead she gave him the tattoo, as promised.
It is not as promised, and I've got evidence to prove it.
Objection! You've got it backwards! If Marianne was posting political photos from the Vote Kayworth or Die group, that gives Christy the motive to unfriend her!
Sounds good to me. Let me just add her to the call. Oh jeez, hang on.
This year is just for me. Through all my trials and tribulations, I'm stuck in this place. 'Cause my heart
Hi, I'm Guilherme Bangini, and this is Loopy Lore. Loopy Lore is a co-op card game where players work together to tell a story they know nothing about. Each round, players take turns as the narrator, flipping a card and then narrating the events of the story based on the card's contents and their own imagination. At the very beginning, the group flips a set of 7 cards. These cards will lay out the foundation of their story. It will tell them what the story is about, in what setting it takes place, who the protagonist of this story is, where they are at the beginning of the story, and finally, the last 3 cards are the ending cards, how the story has to end for the group to win the game. They have to build the story, and it's as easy as 1, 2, 3. They pick one of the 13 instruction templates, draw the corresponding card and put the face down on the table without looking, and finally hand out to each player the corresponding number of plot twist cards. The active player picks one face down card, flips it, and they have 30 seconds on the clock to talk about it. They can narrate however they desire and take the story in whatever direction they want, as long as they mention the content of the card at least once in their narration. Once their time is up, the next player flips a new card and continues in the same manner from where the previous player left off. However, the other players aren't just listening to the narration. At any moment, they can play a plot twist card to throw the story for a loop. These cards contain wild twists or hilarious cues for the narrator to try and include in their narration. Plot twists give the group plenty of benefits as well, such as freezing the timer for the narrator to try and gather their thoughts, and giving whoever played the plot twist the ability to look at one unflipped card and peek ahead in the story to see where it's going. And that wordplay was Loopy Lore. If you want to check out this low-stakes, fast-paced game of collaborative storytelling, we have a version available on itch.io, so you can download and play with your friends at home. Or, if you have Tabletop Simulator, we have a free mod available up on Steam right this second. Go check us out, and I hope you all weave some incredible tales together.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this wonderful panel conversation. My name is Colton David, and this panel is called Oops, All Characters, How to Write 100 Different Humans, asterisks, because we don't always write humans. Sometimes we write animals or monsters or other things. The goal of this panel is to give you, wonderful viewers, some practical tools to write memorable and time-enhancing characters for your video game. I have gathered a wonderful panel of writers, designers, and developers so we can help sort this out. And I'm going to introduce everybody in alphabetical order. We have Carrie Patel. Carrie is a game director at Obsidian Entertainment. She has worked on The Outer Worlds, Pillars of Eternity, Deadfire, the original Pillars of Eternity, and Carrie, you're also a published author of the Recoleta Fantasy series. Is this correct?
That's correct. Nice to see everyone.
Yes, nice to see you too, Carrie. Next on the alphabetical list, we have Kobesoft Joe, the solo developer at Kobesoft Co. Joe is currently developing Dome King Cabbage, a monster collecting visual novel, feast for the eyes, ears, and mind. Joe, is this a correct assessment?
Yeah, I would hope so. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on and all of your normal human self. Next on the list, we have Giselle Francis, writer at Red Thread Games. Giselle is currently working on Dustborn, a narrative action adventure game about a band of misfits on a road trip across an alternate version of America. Hello, Giselle.
Hello.
Hi, nice to see you. Giselle, Jackie, and I all worked at Microphone together, where we worked on a now canceled gotcha puzzle game called Puzzle Legends. I thought I should mention that there. As we move on to Jacqueline Cito, Jackie is a writer at Respawn Entertainment, currently writing on Apex Legends, and again, worked with Giselle and I on Puzzle Legends at Microphone. Hello, Jackie, nice to see you.
Hi, very happy to be here.
I'm happy you are here as well. And next on the list, we have a duo. We have Marino Kitaka and Melo Santani, co-directors at Analgesic Productions. Hello, thank you both for being here. Hope you don't mind being grouped up, I'm sure.
No, that's fine. Yeah, hi. Thanks for having us.
Hi, thank you. Both of you are working on Stephanie right now, a story-driven parkour spelunking 3D platformer with puzzles, and a lot of puzzles I noticed.
Some puzzles, yeah.
That's exciting. And yeah, just writers of wonderful stories and characters. And me, hello, I am Colton David. I am currently a writer at Lo-Fi Games, working on Kenshi 2, but along with that, I'm also a writer and programmer at Bad Pet. We made games like Devil Express and Koala and Friends Dress Up. And that's everybody on the panel. Amazing. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hello.
So to start off this wild discussion on how to write really good characters for really good video games, I think the first thing we need to define is what makes a good character, so we can focus on that and only write good characters, no bad characters. And I think a good place to start with that is to just kind of start describing qualities of really good characters and mention some great characters that we like in video games. So if anyone wants to start off with some faves.
I don't have like an exact favorite character to mention, but more so like a quality, which is a sense of like realness. Like when a character kind of enters the public consciousness, it's very clear how they would act in certain situations. At least it seems that way to me. So like having almost a level of predictability that comes out of a character, like predictable in the way that they would react to certain situations, I think is kind of an important trait. But it's hard to think of a character off the top of my head that fits that description.
Go first, Giselle.
Okay. I also kind of have a take, and that's good characters are characters who meaningfully serve your story. So, like, there are dynamic characters and static characters, and I feel like in general, the more popular characters are dynamic. Like characters who start out in a certain place, and then by the end of the story, they've been changed. But I think that, just because we tend to like a certain character more doesn't necessarily mean that, like, the static character is a bad character, as long as they're both, moving the story forward and setting up those really nice, spicy themes.
I think a good character is often one who engages the player in some sort of relationship. And it doesn't have to be a relationship that takes place through direct interaction. You don't necessarily have to be on screen at the same time. But someone who, sort of can frame themselves in some sort of either, whether it's an oppositional or a complementary relationship to the player, and sort of, create momentum for the player in moving them through the game. And I think that's one reason that antagonists are so well loved in many games. And one reason that characters like, I think, Handsome Jack is very memorable, not only because he's funny, but he's funny in a way that is constantly engaging the player throughout the game. And even though you spend very little time actually in front of him, you feel the pull of that relationship. And I think Frank Pritchard from Deus Ex Human Revolution is another good one. Like, he's this sort of antagonistic bug in your ear for a while, and over time that relationship changes in a very interesting way. And I think both the humor and the relational aspect are part of what make his dynamic with Adam Jensen so memorable. But you can have this with, and this is another thing that I think makes many companion characters memorable, not just because they often have a bit more kind of love and depth devoted to them because they are larger characters, but like Garrus Vakarian is a fan favorite from Mass Effect. He's sort of your ultimate, I guess, like buddy cop. He's your counterpart. He's growing alongside you. He can be a love interest, but he's just as strong as just your sidekick and your wingman. And that's super compelling for a lot of players.
Yeah, and I think I agree with what everyone said. Especially with Carrie talking about like relationships and everything. For me, I think the connection between the character and the player is probably the most important. And what Kobe? Is it Kobe or?
Yeah, Kobe or Joe's okay.
Kobe or Joe? Okay, so what Kobe was saying about how shoot, I lost my train of thought. You know how they're going to react and everything, that they're relatable and human. That's really important as well. And what Giselle was saying about how the character has room for growth. I always think a good place to start off with characters is to find out what their flaws are and where they're going to grow with that. If anyone knows me, I am always a huge obsessed person with Squall Leonhardt from Final Fantasy VIII. Yeah, Colton knows. I talk about it a lot. But like one of the he always gets a bad rep as like this emo character.
Yeah.
But he's not just emo, right? He's layered. He has like abandonment issues. He's afraid of people letting people get close because of that. And he has like all those inner monologues and everything. And those things I think are really relatable to a lot of people. And that's what makes him a good character. Not necessarily for everyone, but I think if you can find the connection between the character and the player, then yeah, that's a good character.
Yeah, I think Final Fantasy is an interesting series to look at for characters too. Like, for me, one of the first like characters with real depth that I experienced was Cloud. And like Giselle said, like the dynamic characters end up being the most interesting. And I think that in that story, Cloud kind of ends up in a very different place from where he starts as kind of like a little emo, a little like indifferent to everything. And so I just think that that part is really appealing for games because there's so many dynamic changes going on like a mechanical level, like leveling up and changing your character, as well as having that growth and change in the narrative too.
To follow up on the Final Fantasy train, I was thinking about some different characters, and it's an interesting question, like asking like characters that come to our minds as favorite characters, because for me it's changed so much over time, like how I feel about different characters. And I think like when I was younger, one of my like favorite games was Final Fantasy IX, and I really liked those characters, Steiner and Vivi and all of them, and they fit these really like very satisfying sort of cartoony archetypes, and it's a little more like fantasy than some of the other Final Fantasies. And when I was like in high school, I remember I was really like put off and like embarrassed by the characters in Final Fantasy X, because they're so much more like awkward in ways that were like too real for me as like a high schooler. But I went back and played that game like a few years ago, and I was like, oh, like this is actually really interesting, and in some regards like a lot more complex than like what was going on in Final Fantasy IX, even though those were like really fun and really satisfying characters. So I think that's an interesting thing to think about, is like how, in what ways you want to like push your audience or pull them, or like what age you think they might be, or like what their expectations might be for what they want versus like what you want to give them and stuff like that. Yeah, like Final Fantasy X has come to mind as like interesting characters because, well, what I wanted to mention in general was just kind of like characters if they have a relation to like the kind of like social or political context of the game, not necessarily like governments or whatever, but I always thought Final Fantasy X is interesting just because like early on, you know, you can see there's already like some people have particular like religious beliefs, and like that laughing scene of like Tidus and Yuna is interesting because you kind of see the characters like pushing each other emotionally and trying to kind of like, you know, overcome sort of the existential horror that like Tidus has in that game's world. But I think more generally, I like it when characters kind of have like sort of contradictory thoughts or patterns of thoughts, almost like an unpredictability to them, because, you know, like as humans, we do a lot of things that go against maybe like our beliefs, or they're not consistent with our like how we want to be, or in some way. And I feel like generally a game stories or like settings that can kind of sustain or hold these characters that are like, maybe they don't act in a predictable way every time. Those tend to feel a bit more resonant in terms of like
thinking about this character, because you're like, oh, well, I wonder why they chose to act this way or think this way at this particular time, or like, how did they resolve this dilemma in which like both directions or ways of thinking, have different problems.
Those are great points, everybody. I feel like growth and predictability and unpredictability are pretty common themes within our answers. And I kind of want to latch onto growth for a minute. How are we able to actually create and show growth within a video game character? I guess we're given a pretty, like, as far as mediums go, a pretty incredible way to do that, because you have an experience where you're mechanically growing along with the player as they're learning the video game that they're operating in. I guess I kind of want to attach that to writing characters and attaching them to mechanics, because I think it's hard to separate player characters from the things that they're actually able to do in the game. And I kind of want to focus on Rena and Melos for this, because I'm a big fan of the Anodyne series, and it has a lot of really fantastic verbs, like go inside of somebody to suck up the yucky mental dust. Could you two describe how you go about creating story along with your mechanics and having that feed into having really great characters? And of course, if anyone else has experience in this or opinions, please jump on in.
Yeah. Marina, you want to?
Sure. Yeah, I think it kind of depends, but we do tend to like to start with kind of mechanical ideas first, mainly because I feel like when we try to go the other way and like come up with a story that we want to tell and then try to figure out what the players are like doing with that story, it's hard to think of stuff that's related enough to be relevant, but not like a cheesy metaphor. And so it helps to start with something that we like find compelling without the story, and then see what kind of themes that those speak to. Sometimes it's like a mix of both, because with Anodyne 2, like the first Anodyne game, you like move dust around with a broom. And so the idea of using like a vacuum is kind of like related to this progression. And then we kind of like develop these Kirby-like mechanics of sucking up and shooting at things, and built the story around that. Do you want to add anything, Melis?
Yeah, like Marina was saying, when we go into the game, it's more of when we go into the games, I think there's usually like some story ideas or like thematic ideas that we have in mind. Like, for example, Stephanie is about like the relationship of Taiwan, Japan, and the US at a very high level. It's not the focus all the time, but that was in the background, and that was there even while we're kind of brainstorming the sort of mechanical aspects of the game. And I think that kind of like dance back and forth between thinking about how the things are going to fit together or how to develop them. I think that's how we develop the sort of very kind of like dense, meaningful worlds that our games tend to have. And yeah, so they're always kind of in conversation with each other. And yeah. That's
a constant conversation seems to be the case, definitely. Does anyone else have a conversation around mechanics and attaching stories in their own games? Joe, I have a question for you, because you're currently working on a visual novel. And
yeah.
As a visual novel maker myself, it's hard. It's hard when you have kind of more limited mechanics to work with, but you're still working within the game. Is there anything fun and cool you're doing within Drinking Cabbage to build cool characters around the mechanics present in a visual novel?
Well, this is nothing new or groundbreaking, but one aspect of the game engine that I'm working in, which is Nani Novel, which I recommend to anyone who wants to get into visual novel making, because it's my favorite visual novel maker. But a pretty standard visual novel mechanic is being able to rewind and make other choices. So I feel like just having a variable kind of tree of options that you can scrub back through and see what results will come out of it is nice for the medium. But my game's a pretty straightforward visual novel, and I don't think it mechanically destroys any barriers or anything. So I adhere to the visual novel kind of scaffolding the same way that a comic artist works with panels and things like that.
I like that. Mechanics as scaffolding to climb to great character heights with.
Right.
That's great. Reminding seems like a really, I don't know. I think we don't think enough about dialogue trees and how often and the different ways we interact with those. So I'm glad someone is out there thinking about it. Carrie, I know you have worked on a lot of video games that have companions, and those companions often have skills. I'm wondering how you go about enhancing the character with their mechanical capabilities, because I know Pillars of Eternity, it's a top-down CRPG where stats matter, what the character abilities are matter, because that's going to affect party composition, and people are going to start making min-maxy decisions over I really like this person and I want to hang out with them decisions. Do you have any insight into how you balance that? Is that a consideration?
So I think some of it depends on, kind of what's the genre, what are the pillars of the game, and what are your larger goals for the game. In Pillars of Eternity and Deadfire, we had a sizable cast of companion characters that we obviously invest a lot of detail in the writing, in the character art, in kind of designing their mechanics and their abilities, making sure that they're a good balance of different personalities and outlooks and skill sets, knowing all the while that many players are going to either pass them up completely or instead hire custom adventurers, whose skill trees and abilities they can design themselves. So I think on some level you have to just make sure that you're being clear with the player about what you're offering them. And then you are giving them the freedom to sort of like serve their plate the way they want it. I feel like one question that we get a lot is, doesn't it break your heart when people, skip through these dialogues or don't pick up your companion characters or do one thing or another? And it's like, well, no, because that's the experience they want to have. And I would much rather offer, sort of a buffet of experiences where people can come to it and get what they want out of it and have a good experience with that, rather than, drag them by the collar and say, you're going to have this and this and this in this order, just like that. So I think it's just about being clear with your player and with your team about what you're offering, making sure that those offerings are solid, and then accepting that, players are going to take and configure and run with those in the way that best suits them. And they're hopefully going to have the best experience doing that.
That's a really great way to approach big casts, especially where players have a lot of choice over who they have to interact with. I think in my own game making efforts, I get very attached to every single thing I make. And everything I make, I need a player to see and I need them to love it. But going in with the expectation of, what they're actually going to get over the game, I think for a lot of games that makes sense. That's a very holistic way to approach your characters, is have them serve the player and what they want, if that's the experience you're able to deliver. Giselle and Jackie, speaking of a lot of characters, I think both of you have some expertise on this. So we all worked on Puzzle Legends, which is it's a gotcha puzzle game that has a giant cast of characters that were already made. For the most part, we got some light character briefs and some pretty pictures, and we kind of had to go off and make characters from things that already exist. And I was wondering if both of you could talk about your process in creating character from something that already exists, in such a way as it did with Puzzle Legends.
Yeah, so the fact that half of it was done for me already, basically informed the rest of what I was going to be doing, and it was all about what I wanted to focus on, and how much was there. So like for one of the characters had this very extensive backstory, and this traumatic, tragic past. So like all of that was already there, and then it was just like me making the decision of what I wanted to do with that, how much I wanted the player to know, and how I wanted to bring about that story, that backstory into the game. Versus like another character that I worked on, that her backstory was very like sparse, and there were just like themes, like sea themes and like the stars, the space, things like that, and her character art. And in that case, it was me then getting the permission to expand the backstory and putting all of my ideas of who that character is. Like, so we have, she's what's the word? She's a navigator on the seas, and she used like the stars to guide her way. And like her personality was very spacey. So then it was like taking those characteristics and saying like, just like adding more to it. Who is this character? Why is she doing what she's doing? What do all of this combination of traits mean to me? And how can I, how can I get story from it? And that was like just expanding on what was already there, and then putting that into this greater story, this greater context.
Yeah, I think I have a very similar process to Giselle. Like, being dropped into something like that where all the characters are already made, we have art and everything, they just need to be really fleshed out. That was kind of right up my alley because I'd been writing fan fiction for years. And so a lot of the time when you're just an amateur writer looking at other people's characters, you're always trying to, fill in the gaps. Why is the character the way they are for this? Like, what can you explore in order to inform like the player and everything, why the character acts the way they do. And so that really just that's the way it falls into place for me. I think the character that I developed a lot, he already had a huge backstory and everything, and but thinking about like how does he talk, how does he carry himself and all that, the art, I think, and already tells so much of a story on its own. Like if you have a character who's going to be drinking a lot, he's probably not going to use like formal language and everything, right? So yeah, just even using like little pieces of art, what's there, and parts of the backstory to fill in the gaps, that really helps me develop a character and flesh them out even further.
That's the same for me because I've only developed visual novels. The way that I learned how to make visual novels was with like kind of placeholder assets and like free visual novel assets. And it feels like there's almost like an innate character that kind of leaps out of the design a lot of the times. So I definitely relate to you on that.
So a lot of times we get things to look at when we go to write, but Jackie and Giselle, have you found your experience writing for Puzzle Legends where you have these like really big briefs? They give you any skills when you have to come up with characters from scratch? Because I know after I left Puzzle Legends, I was really missing it when I had to come up with my own little people. So I started, creating mood boards, and I got way more into Pinterest. Um, I don't know if either of you have had a similar experience after working like that, or if there are any tips to applying designs from the greater world into your own character writing.
Yeah, art is really a really great asset for me personally. I think even just starting from like an archetype is really nice. Like if I'm looking for like a thief character, like I know this person's gonna be a thief. I don't know what kind of thief they're gonna be, but looking up pictures of thieves, and then maybe you find a piece of art that really catches your eye, and you're like, okay, well this thief has keeps their dagger on their back, right? As opposed to like keeping it, at their waist or something. And you're wondering, why does this thief in particular carry the dagger on their back, right? Did something happen so that they don't have, they have a specific reason that they don't carry it at their waist? Even little things like that. If you really find a piece of art that inspires you, it's really easy for that to spark an idea.
I'm curious about Melos and Marina, what you two use as a kind of source material for your characters.
Yeah. Well, Marina can speak to the main characters of Anodyne too, but for say like Stephanie or something, so it's more of like kind of a magical realist sort of fiction style. A lot of that is built upon kind of like observation of people, observation of a reflection on memories and past experiences, and then an observation of like talking with people. Like so those three characters they're all like Taiwanese descent, but they all speak English, and one grew up mostly in Taiwan, one mostly in Japan, one in like the Midwest. So for writing a character like that, you can think a bit about the people who've grown up in those sorts of contexts and how they behave, like what their kind of like beliefs are about how the world should be. Then you just write down like 100 like little ideas relating to each one, and then eventually then you have the character, and you can kind of reasonably write in their voice, right? Because I think it would be a little bit tougher if it was in the form of like just a straight up words only novel, but there's some, because we're writing in the context of of the kind of game Stephanie is, you don't have to like show the inner thoughts of the characters all the time or something, except for certain moments. But yeah, basically, if you kind of have an idea of the general like zone of like life experiences a character should have, and you can base that on your own experience or research, then that can be a useful reference point.
It's actually interesting hearing about like Jacqueline and Giselle and Joe talking about starting from visuals, because we almost never do that. I think partly it's like based on team size, where it's like I'm the sole artist basically, and like writing is easier, it's like faster to iterate on than art, and so we definitely almost always develop the characters in writing first, and especially like the side characters. A lot of the time I just do like a ton of like art for the NPCs like towards the end of development sort of. And what was I going to say about that? Yeah, so it kind of like depends on the game exactly how I go about doing that. I think for like to contrast for our game, Even the Ocean, there are a lot of like kind of like there's just tons of human characters and they all look sort of like ordinary people. And so what I did for that was like I would like Google names, basically like Google image search random like first names, or and that's like helpful because you can get like just like normal random people. Or if you want like someone of like a certain nationality, you can like Google names that are like common in different languages or stuff like that. And that's like a kind of cool thing because I don't know, sometimes if you try to like look up stuff about drawing people who look different ways, it's like the stuff you see is like psychically damaging about, about yeah, art. And then like a different one, so like Anodyne 2, very different kind of character design where it's very like surreal. And for a lot of those characters, like I wanted to like capture feelings that are, I don't know, not like the first thing that I would think of when I go to design something. And so I looked through a lot of my like childhood sketchbooks for inspiration because they're just like, I don't know, random things that kind of my brain worked really differently back then. And so I was like, oh, this is like a weird shape and I can use it somehow. And yeah, I think one thing that I wanted to say about like the visuals of character design is that like it definitely, you know, there's a lot of things that you can do to accentuate certain like emotional responses that people have. But I think that sometimes it's easy to go too far in terms of like if you like exclusively take kind of common wisdom about visual design for characters, it can become this kind of like phrenology type thing where it's like, oh, the shape of your face determines your like whole personality and destiny. And it can like feel like so tied together if you just like stack on more and more ideas about like, oh, this means this makes people feel this way. So I think it's helpful to think about not just like on the one level what the design will make someone feel based on their cultural context, but also think about like how can you like expand what people feel when they see things. And that's really interesting to do.
It's interesting phrenology. I didn't know about the Google search thing for the Even the Ocean portraits.
Yeah.
One quick thing I want to add is just that I think imagery of like places is useful too. Like I'm a big like amateur photographer, I guess. Like I'm always like taking photos with my phone or something. And I think it's an interesting exercise to think about like a particular place and how it makes you feel or how it might make someone else feel. And that can be useful for like small NPCs or something in a game, right? Like you could be in, I think that's why that like liminal spaces visual account is so interesting, is because when you see it, you automatically have an association with what you've done there. You think about what others have done there, and then you think about, you know, how would they reflect on that or something. And so that can be its own like mini character writing exercise.
Something interesting that I'm getting from what you're saying is how much environment shapes your characters in terms of like where they're from and actual like immediate physical surroundings. And also one thought that popped up when Marina was speaking was about like how that kind of weird phrenology can pop up. I think that we as character creators also have to be extremely aware of bad, harmful tropes that are baked in. We're seeing like a lot of conversations about like the new James Bond movie, like the villain has like a facial disfigurement, and just like questioning these character design, like, oh, this is what an evil character looks like. You know, it's like we have a chance to re-examine that as indie creators that like big studios have like a lot more pushback on sometimes.
I kind of want to hop over to Carrie and Bellos really quickly, because I know both of you have a lot of experience in my favorite kind of writing, which is writing small characters. Writing, I'm sure, Carrie, I'm not 1,000% sure if you've populated towns with barks and everything. I'm assuming you have. And Bellos and Marina, I'm not totally sure how the split of anodyne writing goes. I'm sure you both have a hand in it, but there are a lot of little guys walking around in Anodyne, like a little friendly dolphin who will tutorialize stuff for you, and a lost pedestrian. I kind of want to chat about how we make those little interactions with smaller characters create something bigger for our story, you know, because they're a really great way of filling space. But I find when I tend to write space fillers, they can just be space fillers, and they can't actually be pushing my themes or anything forward. So yeah, how do you approach small little chats?
So I think something Mello said at the beginning of our chat about, understanding kind of where your characters are positioned in their society, kind of understanding what their relationships are to, the larger socio-political, economic, cultural dynamics. And I think they're the sorts of things that, they're the obvious things we think of first, but also making sure that we're mining the things we don't think of as often, or that don't come to mind for people as quickly. So if it's a medieval keep, don't just think about the stories of the lords and the ladies and the knights. Think about the groom who's cleaning out the stables and the cook who has to keep everybody fed. If you're telling a story about, famine, war, disease, and the massive migrations of peoples. It's not just about the people who have been, displaced and directly affected. It's also about, how does this affect, the availability of goods and services that people rely on? How does this affect urban crowding? What does it do when people are brought into contact with groups that they don't normally come into contact with? And what curiosities or biases or fears does that activate? I think another thing besides kind of digging into those deeper layers of like, how are different people affected by what's going on in this world, is also just making sure that you're giving these characters a story. Like, even if it's something that only lives in your head, if you're looking at these characters as just sort of, barkers who are going to fill out a little bit of lore, then it's going to feel very much like that to the player. But if you're like, well, no, here's the cook of the keep who's dealing with a bunch of peasants who have, kind of flooded the castle. And then here's, the stable hand, who's trying to keep the horses, shod and everything. I don't know. What's their story? What's their relationship? They've known each other a while. Like, what are their pet peeves? And just investing a little bit more in understanding who they are and letting that inform the way you write them, and sort of creating or suggesting sort of a little spine of a story between them. Not something you have to go into great detail about, but just something that makes those interactions feel more human.
Cool. Yeah, it's interesting to hear about, especially playing a series. I kind of like the Trail series of JRPGs. Which aren't, they have issues, but sometimes I like the ways in which they illustrate a particular like country or town or something through like too much detail. But let's see. So yeah, thinking about Anodyne 2, for example, I think in its case, so if you've never played Anodyne 2, you can kind of break it into almost like 3 acts almost, and the thematic differences between these acts are kind of considering the effects of that main mechanic of vacuuming dust out of people to like sort of clean them. And so I think, so in some games, we might have NPCs might be illustrating the particular political climate of some place or whatever, but in Anodyne 2, it's more about, depending on what kind of arc the NPC is inside of, the dialogue is tends to be a bit more about illustrating a theme relating to that way of portraying the dust vacuuming. So, for example, like halfway through the game, there's like a area where it's shown that like the cleaning process is not as good or like straightforwardly good as you thought it would be. And then very late in the game, there's an area where people are kind of like living in a sort of ideal like society. So in those cases, they're not like traditional like political context, but you can kind of give the characters voices to speak to a certain exploration of a narrative theme that kind of falls under the general like atmosphere of that arc of the story. Yeah, and through that, people can kind of imagine more to the world than there actually is. Yeah,
that's a good point. That's a really great tool in writing, is getting player to imagine a bigger world that we do not have the time or money to create. And I think that's a really, that's using a town really effectively. I think what really creates a nice town, would we consider a town a character? I think towns are characters. Is filling it with characters that represent the vibe you're going for and the mood you're going for too. Going back to Final Fantasy VIII for a minute, Fisherman's Horizon, spoilers for Final Fantasy VIII. At a certain point, you have a big flying school, and the school crashes into this little fisherman village, and a lot of really big drama happens. And right after that big drama happens, you're in a little fishing village, and some character relationship things have happened. You have this nice, quiet place to settle it. So when you're exploring the town and you're chatting with people, it's kind of used as a way to decompress after some intense drama. So using small characters to push the stuff you're going for, or just use it as another tool. Little characters are tools for our big characters, and our biggest character, which is the story. Speaking of big characters, we've talked a lot about all types of characters, but I want to focus on player characters or protagonists or main characters. Characters that the player are going to spend a lot of time with. And what I want to focus on is how we make characters that are easy to spend time with. Because, our games can be anywhere from 1 hour to 1,000 hours. And it's a lot more time than a lot of other mediums give to having you be around this one personality. So I would love to just open the floor for people to talk about how they develop their own protagonists, main characters, mainstays that are always going to be a part of the game and story.
I can hop in if no one else has anything. So, I mean, in general, I think two things that can give characters a lot of staying power. I think the first is just giving them depth and layers, and things that are surprising to discover. One of the things that I think a lot of folks really loved about Adair, who's one of your Pillars 1 companions, is his love of animals. It has nothing to do with anything else about his personality, his skill set, his role in the party or in the game. It's just a really cute, kind of sweet, relatable thing about him. And it's surprising, a little surprising alongside, everything else you learn about him. Similarly, my husband and I have been watching a lot of Always Sunny in Philadelphia. And one of the things that's very interesting is Charlie seems like the biggest disaster of all the characters, but in a lot of ways, he's actually the most competent and the most down to earth. And so getting to kind of find those layers and those contradictions within those characters makes them very interesting, even after you're spending hours and hours with them. A second thing that I think can make a lot of characters very likable to players, to any audience, is self-awareness. I think that is probably one of the most compelling traits a character can have. I think it's something that creates a lot of room for growth and complexity, especially in very flawed characters. And it's also something that if you see a character really exercise that, can create a lot of room for forgiveness, around some of their larger flaws. So not that everybody has to be super contradictory, self-aware people, but I think those are two interesting qualities to lean on if you're looking to write someone who people are going to spend many hours with.
Yeah, I think so. A lot of times in games, you'll have like the blank slate character, or you'll have a character who's like not supposed to be you. And I think writing for those two characters is like very different. If it's blank slate, then it's like the player is themselves is like stepping into that character, and like that's them. So usually they are like customizing them in a certain way to their liking, and that means that the writing has to be like I get kind of general in a way, like it similarly to the way that people do like horoscope writing. It can apply to anyone, so that you have these different choices where it like going throughout the story where it's like this is me, this is still going to be me, and like nothing that I'm saying or none of the choices that I'm making are going against how I want this particular character to move forward in the game, versus like characters who like aren't the player, and who are their own character and who are making their own decisions. And basically what goes into that is just, it goes back to our first question of what goes into making a good character. And, that's like, making them compelling and allowing them to grow, and just like putting in these different qualities that make them interesting, like a rich inner life, and making them like relatable and human, and like having like interesting flaws that like you can relate to.
Yeah, and just jumping in on that, that's a really great way to also make like anti-hero characters. People like Kratos. Kratos is a very bloodthirsty character, especially in the original trilogy. But you can kind of stand behind him because you understand why he's doing it. And that's kind of related to what Carrie was talking about as well, with making your characters relatable. Two of the biggest things for me, I think, with creating big characters are the connection, like I was talking about before, that ties into the relatability of the character. As long as you can find a quality within that character that you can really connect to, that's something that will help pull the player into the game. And the second thing I think is also a fantasy. Like a lot of people play video games for the escapism. So you're probably not gonna go on a crazy murdering spree of Greek gods. But I mean, if you're playing as Kratos, that's something you can do, right? You'll never evolve to be a god, but if you're Kratos, that's great. You can actually play a game where you can be that, right? So having like that fantasy element is really great too. Yeah.
Yeah, I also think that the kind of dichotomy that Giselle set up is really interesting. And I think there's also interesting ways that you can kind of sidestep certain aspects, or like go approach from different directions, where like I think a lot of our games kind of like play with this concept of like a silent protagonist, or like a kind of neutral like portal, like window kind of character. Either by like in the because there's like kind of practical considerations where if you create a game that has some like openness to the structure, it's hard to like have like a strong traditional character and traditional character arc, because of all the like accounting for different paths that you might have to think about. And so like one thing that you can do with like Anodyne 1, where you kind of approach it like a dream world, and then like the world being a character reflects on the protagonist, perhaps, or you could interpret it in that way. Or yeah, like in Anodyne 2, the character kind of starts as a silent protagonist and then like becomes more of a character as certain things happen throughout the game. So yeah, there's some interesting ways you can like play with those dynamics.
I actually want to talk about like the silent protagonist thing a little bit as well. I'm just thinking about Chrono Trigger, where Chrono, he doesn't say a word the entire game, but the characters around him are the ones that are compelling. So you can kind of tell, it's a linear storyline, so you can kind of tell that Chrono is like a generally good guy, but you don't really know anything else about him other than what you are made to do as the game goes on. It's the side cast of characters that kind of keep you drawn in with the rest of the story. Mm-hmm. So sometimes even if you're not creating like the most compelling protagonist, just fleshing out the characters around them can be a really great way to draw in players.
Yeah, I guess one quick note, one thing, I'm hearing people talk about like fleshing out, and something I've noticed a lot by playing, I guess, a lot of some of the more popular kind of like gacha games or JRPGs. While they may not be like my favorite stories, at the same time, there's that a lot of the effective ones, they have this like pattern of it's kind of like an arc to how you learn about the character. You kind of approach them on sort of the surface level, and then there's this fun, almost like formulaic satisfaction to like kind of unraveling their like sort of, I don't want to say trauma salad, but sometimes it feels like that. But I feel like that can be applicable to just the way in which, and I think I'm speaking a bit out of my depth here because I don't have that much experience with like writing big characters, but at least for Stephanie, I found it was fun to introduce the characters sort of on a more like professional level. Like you might meet someone at a business meeting, and then the game goes into kind of these longer backstories. So you kind of get this like tension building up of wanting to know more about these people, and then you like, you kind of give that to the person playing, like a long like scene or whatever.
Trauma salad is a really powerful phrase I think we've all picked up today. Yes, we're unfortunately running out of time. Very sad. Time has definitely flown, but I have one more question I would like to raise to everybody. Very important question, probably the hardest question we're going to ask here, is how do you come up with names for your characters? How do you do that? I'm going to start with Colby, because you have so many the wild characters. I would love to know your process. Then we can all talk about.
Yeah. So my partner is also making a game. Her name is Mini Pete, if you're familiar with that artist. She's making Melon Journey 2. And we talk about naming characters a lot and the kind of baggage that comes with certain names. And to be truthful, I really don't have an answer. It feels like most of my ideas kind of fall into my head, and it's kind of very stream of consciousness. It's the same way that I name like music tracks when I'm making them, is like I'll just name it the first thing that comes to my head, which definitely backfires sometimes. But yeah, I would say that for me, what's important is trying to find names that have as little of that baggage as possible. And that just works for me in my world, just to try to go away from preconceived notions as much as I can, which is still impossible. It's an impossible feat, but I still just try to do that.
I spend a lot of time on baby naming websites. And then it's like, who is the character? Like, what is the purpose of this character, and like, what am I trying to do with it? And if there is like a theme that I'm trying to go for, I might get a little bit cheeky with it. Like, if the character is really, really brave and I'm going for that archetype, I might give them a name that means bravery on the baby naming site. Or if I want to be ironic, I might go in the separate direction and have the coward have that name. If it like fire might be like they'll have like a synonym for fire, but also while like not trying to go super obvious, like every fire character's name is Amber. Ember. And if I'm not going for a theme, then it's just whatever I vibe with as I'm scrolling through, whatever I feel like sounds good or fits for whatever reason that has absolutely zero criteria to it, whatever I think fits. And after that, I will take my name, put it into Google, and see if that name has been taken already, if there is a celebrity that I had no idea about who has that name, and if it passes that test and I like it, then it stays.
Yeah, I definitely also do the spend a lot of time on the baby name sites for the more like naturalistic names, definitely. And then yeah, sometimes they're just like kind of like gibberish or puns. One thing that's kind of fun to do is to like make a whole, this goes back to like minor characters and also humor, but like to make like a whole character, sometimes like the character comes from the name, where I just think of like a funny name or it's like a pun or a joke, and I'll make like a whole little like scenario surrounding this character without like directly explaining, which I think is like a fun thing for humor, is when the player has to kind of like piece things together, and maybe they'll just miss it and it doesn't matter, but it's just like a weird little thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely done a combination of both those things, like baby naming websites, and probably because I've played way too much Ace Attorney, I always like to make name puns as well. One other thing, I guess, is I write a lot of like fantasy or sci-fi worlds, so sometimes like regular names just don't sound right in those worlds. And I guess I'm kind of a hater of really common names too. So sometimes I'll just try to figure out something that like sounds nice that might fit into the world, and then I'll throw that in there. It might not mean anything, and I just do it. I know it's probably not the best way to go about it, but that's just kind of what I like doing sometimes. Good luck to any future children I may have.
Yeah, I have a problem in my folders where I have a lot of unnamed characters, and it's just like Lil Guy, Lil Demon. Like I need to name more characters, honestly. So I'm a student here. I'm trying to get some tips from all of you.
I think the only thing I'd add to what folks have already said is, especially if you have a really large cast of characters or like lots of little minor incidental people here and there that you have to name, keep a list somewhere, especially if you have like different languages or kind of language traditions. Keep a list of names you've come up with, because that'll save you brainstorming when it comes to actually having to come up with those names. Like, generate a big old list of names that works in your world or in your setting, and then cross them off as you use them, because it's very easy to, need a name and not be able to find one, or end up naming like the same 5 characters Jack, or 5 different characters Jack, and then you're like, how did this happen? So
Yeah. I guess my last thing is the baby naming is such a funny like commonality between all of us. But other than that, it's nice to think about. Well, okay. So in the case of like Stephanie, thinking about names, obviously there's like the local context where they live, but also kind of the historical context. So like one of the characters' moms has a more sort of like immigrant kind of name, not immigrant, more like Chinese name than the daughter does. So those are like little details that can help you inform the direction of like picking a name. For like Anodyne 2, you know, those names are just, they're just like strange, right? So in those cases, I think for me, I would use the theme of the area or something. Or if like the characters are related. So like in Anodyne 2, there's like a little like small island where there's like these 5 like women, and they all kind of have similarly like Japanese sounding names, due to kind of like what they're talking about in the area. But they're all like kind of like fictional as well. Or like you have kind of like a humorous, fun idea and use that to kind of inform all of the names. Like one of the areas in Anodyne 2, all the characters have like rock themed names, I think. Because it's sort of fantastical, right? Like people were saying, so you don't want everyone to be like Scott the Speaking Rock or something.
I just thought of one other thing that I do, which is sometimes I go to like name generation sites and I'll riff off of what they have on there. I won't necessarily take the name there, but sometimes they have some interesting ideas of like different sounds for names. And sometimes you might find something that you like just from brainstorming off of those.
Yes, definitely. I use a lot of those for Kenshi writing. I think it really comes back to keeping it consistent with the theme of your game and world, the style more than theme, I would say. Because in Kenshi writing, everything's supposed to sound really like kind of gross and terrible. So I find myself naming characters more off of like sounds I will make with my mouth than like John or Jim or Joel. Sorry, Joe.
That's okay.
Amazing. This has been an amazing talk and panel, everybody. We are coming to an end, and this makes me really tragically sad, but just like stories, panels have to end too. Yes, they do, and it is. So thank you all so much for joining. This has been really fun. Does anyone want to say where people can find you or some cool thing you're making that's coming out? This is a great chance for that, really super fast.
Well, we're making a game, Stephanie, Melis, and I, coming out soon. We've talked about it, but yeah, it should be coming out probably early next year.
There's a free demo on Steam. Be sure to wishlist it, and then follow us on Twitter and recently TikTok.
Oh, hello.
Yeah, you can follow me at KobeSoftCo everywhere. I also tried TikTok and it failed so bad, so you don't have to follow me there because I don't post very often. But anywhere else is good.
You can find. Oh, go ahead, Giselle.
Hi, I'm Giselle. You can follow me on Twitter at Beware the Siren.
You can also find me on Twitter at Jack Plays, and you can see some of my work coming up in Apex Legends Season 11.
I was going to try to stay mysterious, but you can find me on Twitter at Carrie_Patel.
Amazing. Perfect. Last call for self-promo. Okay, perfect. Great. Thank you so much, everyone. This has been Oops All Characters, how to write 100 different humans. Hopefully you learned something today. I encourage you to follow and interact and spend money on everybody's games. And hopefully more great panels and talks happen. I hope you enjoy Wordplay. It's a great festival. I'm sure the talk before or after us is great, will be great, or was really great. So look forward to more or less of that. And yeah, thank you so much for your time. Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye.
Okay, we need to get real honest for a second. My mom wants me to advertise this game to like kids and to pet websites. How do I tell her that there's cocaine in the game? There's a dog who talks about Happy Salt. He's got a big Texan hat, and he's just like, there was a lot of Happy Salt around in the 80s, and you don't know what 80s he's talking about, because dogs didn't run airports in the 80s, and also there's just straight up a dog who says cocaine isn't legal if a dog does it. Which, again, he's not wrong, because laws don't apply to dogs. These dogs are having some existential nightmares because they're exposed to the entire cosmos of space. I don't know how to explain my mom, but there's absolutely a dog who says it's not illegal to do cocaine.
He got the silliest dream they'd ever heard. They said he wanted to become a knight.
The swordless knight that changed the fate of the kingdom for the rest of eternity. Addison, the Beast Slayer! Was he actually doing cartwheels?
Addison, son of Gerfaza, the upper fields right here for you. All day, every day. I'm just your run-of-the-mill prairie buck, man. Whoa.
For your information, everyone already thinks that Rose are thick-skulled.
You're many, many things, dear, but subtle is not one of them.
That's it! Her butt! Did he talk about anyone's butt?
How can a country boy with ambitions as great as yours go on living, knowing he can't aspire to more than his deplorable life?
Farmhands don't become knights.
Then I guess the only question I've got left is this going anywhere at all?
Do I have to say yes or no to get out of here alive?
Oh, Adder! Smooch! Smooch! Smoochy!
I'll go first. My high place phobia is sad, bad, and a tad mad.
What kind of game is this?
In Glom, players have 3 minutes to create a Glom. Rewrite the phrase while following the rule and try to meet the goal.
No!
Players that break the rule or use any of the words in the phrase are disqualified.
What?
And the player who best met the goal wins the round. That's it.
Each word. Each word. Yeah.
Doesn't have to start with an S, it has to be.
What if I spell it wrong?
Glom is simple to play, trivial to teach, and the base deck alone includes over 30,000 possible rounds.
No N's?
Yeah.
That means Novella is out.
I got.
Damn it!
Anyone can win a game of Glom, but being good at Glom is a life skill, and being bad at Glom is pretty fun too, which makes it perfect for parties, families, and even classrooms.
That's it! Subsequent!
You had 3 whole minutes.
I know!
One more time.
Hey, my name is Ryan. I'm a developer at Subliminal Gaming. I'm one of 3 right now, and I am the writer on Button City, a game about a super cute fox who lives in a diorama world and is trying to save an arcade in the sky. Today I'm going to be talking to you about the writing on Button City and how we created this sincere, cute little world, and how we breathed life into the world itself and the characters who inhabit it. In Button City, you take control of Fennel. He's the new kid in town, and you explore these diorama worlds. They're set in this stacked world, and you zoomy between each island and explore it. When you're not exploring the world, you're at the Button City arcade playing games with the Fluff Squad, your new friends in town. And you're all playing the latest, hottest game, GoBots, a 4v4 arcade brawler where you have to harvest fruit and take it to the blender in the middle of the map and defeat the other team. Along your arcade journey, you discover that the Button City arcade is being threatened of being shut down. So it's up to you and your newfound friends, and even some of your rivals, to save the Button City arcade through kid hijinks, either through selling lemonade or pretending to be Mr. Button, the arcade owner, and trying to convince the evil fat cat Pepperbottom to not sell it. We were really inspired by things like movies from the 90s and other stories that we heard growing up. We were also inspired by our local arcade community and gaming community that we were part of and would play games with, including games like Splatoon, where we would get together and hold tournaments. Button City is our second game for the studio, and it's our first 3D title. When we first started on this journey, we didn't know that we were going to be making Button City. All we knew is that we wanted to make a 3D game. Something cute and in the style that my wife does, which is this low poly bright aesthetic. When we first started out, it was a completely different game. Some keystones that we kind of knew that we wanted, though, is that we wanted it to be in Shandine's style. Very cute animals, bright. And we also wanted to have a story alongside it. The first prototype that we made of a completely different game had you explore the woods with a cell phone and looking for ghosts. When we got to something closer to Button City, it was because of a tweet that Shandine made, where she tweeted out a cute little fox character on this little diorama with a house. And it did pretty well in terms of reach, and people seemed to really like it. And so she just kept making this fox. While I was trying to work on our other prototypes, she was wanting me to put in some basic movement so the character could walk around, maybe some interactions with the world inside it. It wasn't really anything outside of just a little interactive box, effectively. More and more people seem to be interested just from this little cute fox doing this little like paws together like, oh, I'm so shy type of thing, that we just kept on working on it. Eventually we would get in a second character and put in a very basic dialogue system. We didn't really know what the game would be yet. So the first prototype, we eventually came up with this idea of this character who lost their keys in a claw machine at the arcade. We didn't know that there was going to be, like the Button City arcade. It was just like, oh, there's some arcade somewhere and there's a claw machine, and it's probably just outside it. You can't even go inside the arcade. And we just wanted to make something that we could be like, okay, let's get our feet wet with, like a 3D project and like just out of the way so we can move on to like something bigger, because we didn't think it would scope much bigger than, oh, go get the keys, go do this other thing like get a coffee, get some bike tires or something like that, like a traditional like adventure game type of deal. So we never actually had any intention of making Button City into a full game. In fact, at the time, it was just named after the fox, called Fennel Fox. Around the same time, we were also trying to figure out how to move between these worlds because we wanted to keep the diorama intact because it felt unique and we haven't seen anything quite like it anywhere else. I spent a lot of time looking at a Rubik's Cube and trying to do like this rotation thing where it would like flip over and reveal another area all in the same thing. So it would kind of like flip over and scale up and animate. But we had a object permanence issue where you can't really remember where you came from or where you were going. So we came up with the stacking thing where when the camera zooms out, it reveals all the layers and the character kind of dematerializes and goes between layers, and then when it zooms back in, the character rematerializes. This was a really interesting prospect for a world because that means we could have as many spaces as we wanted without having to really think where it was going to end up in the final game. It would just end up in the stack. We were excited because more people were becoming interested in the title and its unique setting and unique characters, that it didn't feel quite right just to have something that we'd make in a few weeks with a single quest line. So at this time, we decided to effectively scrap the ideas that we had for the prototype. You know, simple, get your keys out of a claw machine so you could go home, to play some video games with your friend. And we were trying to figure out how to expand on this. At this point in time, when trying to discover like what the game would be, there was like a lot of loss within my life at the time, so I kind of wanted to still be within the space of, you know, like losing something. So we were still very much inspired by like our communities that we were part of, like the gaming community and things like that. And so I wanted it to be centralized around the arcade. We already had an arcade in mind, and we wanted to kind of talk about the communities there. And what if this central pillar of the community left, effectively? And about a kid's first kind of major kind of loss in life type of deal. This obviously conjures up a lot of, you know, like kind of classic kid stories anyways, like it's kind of cheesy, but you know, it's fun to write and it's very wholesome and cozy in terms of like how it's presented. Things like, you know, themes of friendship and community and things like that. When I was thinking of it initially, it'd be things like, oh, we're coming together, but things aren't quite working. And you just, it was more of a thing about failure. And even through failure, like we could still come together. It's not necessarily this central pillar, but more about the community itself. When we were designing the game, we even had it being centrally designed around an arcade cabinet that eventually went up to Meow Wolf. The game's still not on there, but it was designed to be worked on a single joystick and buttons, and anybody could pick up and play it. So the theme of like the arcade was very much a through line for the game, including its control scheme and medium of choice, which helped us out later in terms of creating systems for rebinding controls and stuff, because we already made it simplified for arcade. So two things kind of happened when we were creating Button City. One is that we were playing a lot of tournaments at our local game shop, and then two, a big arcade actually came to town in the middle of creating Button City, and we really wanted to capture the friendships and the camaraderie around playing these games. Things like high scores or going through tournaments or teaming up with friends and making temporary rivals, things like that. Really enjoying the dynamics of those type of stories. You often see them in like sports, especially soccer, and supporter groups where you'll be extremely excited for your team, but you could still come together with like another supporter group and be very excited for the game overall. So that's something that we really wanted to kind of impart with Button City, which were like kind of the connections that all the characters share to the space and to each other, even if they're not the friendliest all the times to each other. To do that, we created GobaBots as kind of like the central game that brings all of them together. And since GobaBots is a team game, they each had to have like these little gangs to come together and fight about. And with that, we also had it where they were competing for this new character in the GobaBots game called the Golden GobaBot. It was rumored to have the power of 4 and effectively the rarest GobaBot of them all. It was only awarded to one team who would be the winner at the arcade. So creating the structure kind of brought all the characters together to their favorite arcade game and kind of a central talking point. Not only did we have this for a narrative structure to break up just the exploration gameplay and to have more of a core gameplay loop, we did this so we could have the quote-unquote anime rivalries. It's fun writing all these little teams, including one that's based off the development team called the Scrub Squad. Throughout the story, we wanted to go through this exploration and then arcade game challenges and go back and forth while you're all trying to save the arcade, meet new friends, learn about them, and then ultimately try to save the arcade. Our initial inspirations were obviously our gaming communities and stories from. So there were a lot of initial inspirations, everything from the art and Shandin being an absolute fan of cats and Animal Crossing and cute animals, to inspirations that I had where it was things like, you know, early 90s, like straight to VHS type of movies, really cheesy shows, like very much like looking at a story lens from, you know, like a kid type of deal. And really wanting to convey a story about a group of friends banding together to try to save the arcade. Very classic, just story. We did want to do a few twists on the story, though. We really wanted to have the main character not be effectively the main character. They're not necessarily the one driving the story forward completely, or at least offering up solutions to save the arcade. You're kind of along for the ride and trying to help, but ultimately just kind of failing as a team. Every single thing that they try to do just ends up in failure, unfortunately. And it was very much like, kind of structured around this idea of losing a loved one to like sickness in a way, where you're trying to do everything you can, but it's more about comforting them in some ways. But obviously for this, it's like these kids just don't understand, like, oh, this thing is like kind of falling apart. So it was a very feudalistic type of like inspiration with this arcade goal. When structuring out the game, I was thinking of it kind of like over multiple days, like 6 days for the entire events to happen, and you'd be able to go through each day, and it would start out with Lionel first discovering the arcade, then meeting the friends, and then hanging out with each friend, then getting into the ultimate hijinks heist type of deal, where it's the ultimate plan before the arcade kind of shuts down, and then finale where they were originally going to say goodbye to the arcade. So when it came time to actually start making the game, we looked not necessarily at games for how we wanted to present the story. The game is very cinematic in nature. Everything has actual cinematic shots. It's all set out and everything. It's not the classic visual novel way of things working out, and it doesn't even have really all that many branching dialogues. We really wanted to convey this slice of life story about this kid who is lonely, finds some friends, and right when he starts finding them, and this central thing that brings them all together, it's starting to go away effectively and taken away and dying. So we wanted to have players kind of go on a Saturday morning cartoon adventure. On Sincerity in Button City, it's a little hard to like not see it. It's just oozing from each and every crevice of the game. Honestly, it's kind of hard to be cynical or anything with that. But I also want to say that the Sincerity wasn't necessarily like writing for optimism initially. In fact, it was a very pessimistic type of writing in that all of the actions that the characters were doing would fail and it would kind of just go down. When writing, I tended to try to make it sadder than what ultimately came out, and in some ways it's played comedically, not intentionally, but just because of how the characters are presented. There's a few parts in the story where it does get a little bit more somber, but even before then, it was going to be kind of systematized even, where at different points in the game, like depending on, you know, like what happened in a story beat, the character Fennel would have these like little things that I would call quips, and he would kind of just say them based on what just recently happened. So if they won a game, yay, I'm awesome, whatever. But you know, like if you know, like something bad kind of happened, like in the story or something like that, he'd be like, "Oh, I'm a failure. Nobody likes me." You know, like very, very, just kind of kid, like, "Oh shucks" type of deal. But even got to like more depressive stuff. At this point in time, I was very much sadder than where I am now. And then there were other moments too with the game where it was trying to come off more somber as well. Kind of trying to create a rift between Fennel and his friends at one point, and him being kind of ousted out. One point with his mother and her being kind of an only mother and them not really connecting, kind of trying to get like a sense of like somber abandonment type of feelings type of deal in there. Very sad, gosh, sad boy type of stuff. But when creating these things initially, it was very much like, oh, I'm not feeling great. It's trying to put like not tragic stuff into the game, but wanting to have it be more emotive than not. And in putting it through the lens of Button City, it kind of came to where it was, I don't know, just very cozy and sincere eventually. I did eventually kind of correct some tonal stuff. We got rid of the quips because two reasons. One, we didn't want Fennel being that down on himself. Also, we didn't want to like balloon up the word count for no reason, and a few other things. And then it just didn't fully match the tone of the game. There's still undertones for sure. During a dream sequence, there's like some little self-doubts and things like that, but I think that was just good writing. The kind of key twist with Mr. Button, who is the owner of the arcade, I think is emotionally resonant. So just kind of thinking of it still from like an emotion basis rather than like anything else. Like, I don't know, it's kind of funny just thinking, oh, how can I make this very emotive? And it's just this bright kind of in your face pastel like happiness game, you know? When writing for it though, when creating characters, I tended to think of like anchors first and then motives, even if it was like small things. For Fennel, like his anchors are very much like self-acceptance and wanting to belong within a group, you know, just very outsider mentality, kind of black sheep, very lonely kid, because, you know, he's just kind of left alone to his own devices at home, because his mother's out at work all the time and it's a single mother. She's a single mother, and just not being too sure of himself. But also being like extremely supportive of his friends. Like he will talk up his friends but talk himself down effectively. Then there's Sorrel, who's your kind of best friend in a way, the one who actually brings you into the group. For her, she's very, her anchors would be that she's very hot-tempered, that she kind of speaks before she thinks type of deal. She also has a little bit of a acceptance type of like wanting to be approved as well type of anchor, and a quote-unquote dark past, even though it's not dark at all. It's just very cute kind of twist for the story. And then like her motivations are very much like she just wants to prove herself as somebody who's amazing and awesome. So just kind of thinking of it in those type of cases where, oh, what's holding me back? What are like the day-to-day things that I need to carry, the anchor that I have to carry, and like what's moving me forward with this anchor. So thinking of it in that kind of structure. Even though it's a very cheesy, cute game, framing it from that type of standpoint, I think helped in the long run, even if it started from like, oh, I want a sad emotional game, but it's impossible to be too sad or too emotional with the presentation. Maybe that's a good recipe for for what it is to be sincere, where it's like, oh, we're trying to be very upfront, or like we're trying very sincerely to be emotional, but maybe not in the best presentation. I don't know. Let's see. So with sincerity, we also have diversity, inclusiveness, at least where we can. It's a little bit harder to do racial diversity when all the characters are not necessarily coded racially, but we do have gender diversity and then ability inclusivity, along with age inclusivity. So we have, you know, older characters, we have characters with who live with disabilities, we have characters who present, you know, male, female, and binary as well, and we kind of approached it in more of a casual way rather than saying anything too deep on it, more along the lines of like, these are people, they're within our worlds, they're accepted, and they are whole. We tried to, when I say we, I worked with not only my wife in terms of coming up with characters and things like that. We also brought in somebody to help us with accessibility and disability representation, and how we actually worked on some of our systems in the game, like with control rebinding and things like that as well. But to help shape out one of our characters named Chive, who uses a wheelchair. And in her story, when you hang out with her, she wants to play this game called Revolution Racer, which is a racing game, but she can't use the pedals because she can't use her feet. So in the story, we have her as this extremely smart, tech-savvy person who decides that, hey, I really love the comic of Revolution Racer. I really want to play the arcade game. I'm going to mod the arcade game. And you, as the player, Fennel, are just kind of along for the ride. She's very much like, oh, I'm going to do this with you or without you anyways, but you can come hang out. So you explore this kind of like upcycle center with a bunch of electronics and stuff, and you're just helping find the electronics, and then you go hang out with her in her house, and she creates a mod to install into the arcade game. So we made it very much her story where, yeah, there was an obstacle because of the arcade game not being accessible, but she put herself forward to make it accessible for her. So we wanted her to be kind of like that protagonist within her own story. Along the way, also, Fennel doesn't really, like ask her like, oh, why are you in a wheelchair or anything like that, and just hanging out, just cool. You're really cool at making tech. That's pretty much it. So just acknowledging, but not fully making it like a plot device or sad or anything like that. We worked with Emily Serrato to help us flesh out the character even more and just really bring her to life. Obviously, this is still the bare minimum. In the future, would like to get more diverse people on writing as well, to really lend their voices to characters and lived experiences. But in terms for writing these characters, we just wanted to have them be full people and really present them as their awesome selves. So one of the major changes that happened with the game was how we wrote the ending, where the arcade was shut down, and it was about the community coming together in spite of it and still being there afterwards. I think that's good in some ways, but after going to a GDC talk in 2018, it was the Indie Soapbox, and watching a talk by Ethan Red, he talked about this kind of like weak wave type of deal, and kind of being like down on themselves, and kind of creating fatalistic type of outcomes within stories and fantasies, and how we shouldn't be looking to make these weak wave type of deals, that we should look towards hopeful and bright futures, to look at things like Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek and things like that, to where the future looks bright and hopeful. And after reflecting on that for a bit, it was like, well, okay, instead of doing this ending with, you know, like closing, which felt more on a twist of like the genre trope of like, yay, everything's saved, we did keep the we did have Button City be saved, but I wanted it to still be set up to where you're not really the one individual who's saving it, to where it's a community effort, to where yeah, we all came together to say goodbye, but we're not going to let this happen type of deal. And in the end, it's not like Fennel's the hero. It's more along the lines of he's part of a community who cares. And I think that ultimately came out as a better ending, rather than it just being like, oh, sad times. And or one where it's like, aha, we beat the evil, we being like the player themselves. So that's something that I think made Button City better in the long run, and I want to thank Ethan for giving that talk. I highly recommend it. On how you can make your games more sincere if you want them to be, is honestly just write vulnerability. Even if it seems cheesy, write for almost too much emotion, not necessarily sad, but something that seems true, like the characters actually are feeling that, and just putting it forward. Be cheesy in some ways. Just it's kind of like a dad joke, you know, it's like that and the reason why you get that is because it was kind of the obvious thing, and you know, that's not necessarily bad. It's just sometimes it's like kind of groan worthy, but it could also be good. You don't have to go full like Hallmark movie special either. It could be deep and it could be complex, and it can be vulnerable. It's just riding forward on that. And you can even poke fun at it sometimes too. You could be kind of a back and forth of sincerity and cynicism, and sometimes that makes it even more sincere, honestly, where you kind of point at like, oh, that's weird, but then like you're like, yeah, but it's worth it. Writing characters with motivations and with anchors and how they move forward with those anchors is important when writing for sincerity, and how they pick up those things or drop them off, those anchors, when they need to, is also important. How do characters move forward when they stumble, and how do they put things down effectively? You don't need to be grim dark to show emotion. You can be a bright pastel thing. It's more about connections than having dark theming to make something sad or happy or whatever. It's more about how you craft up the emotion and then put them in a situation that challenges them, where you get a connection or emotion. Write tangents, write silly little asides, I guess. People don't always talk plot. They talk about their lives. They talk about how they're feeling. They talk about little things. Put character into your characters and don't make them just plot devices. And then I guess finally on writing sincerity is to also just join communities, strengthen your relationships with friends and family, observe, have you talk to each other, see how dynamics work, and draw from experiences like that and bring them back into the game. Sincerity doesn't necessarily have to be happy. It could be, like true emotions type of deal, just presented forthright and straightforward, and draw from real life in that. I hope you enjoyed this talk, and I hope you enjoy Button City. It was an extremely interesting journey to write it, and I hope that it sincerely is something that connects with you. You could find me on Twitter at SubliminalMan. You could find out more about the game at buttoncitygame.com, and you could get the game on Steam, Nintendo Switch, PS5, and Xbox Series X and S. I hope you have a wonderful day, and thank you.
And that's a wrap on day one of Wordplay 2021. But it's not over just yet. There's going to be more Wordplay talks and games tomorrow, so don't touch that dial for a whole 24 hours. Handling Society wants to thank staff, our members, our sponsors, and friends who helped to make this event incredibly possible for another year. We don't plan on stopping, and with your support, we can continue this festival. Thanks so much, and we'll see you tomorrow.